This is the Instant Speed Podcast, brought to you by FABDB.net, your premier source for deck building tools, collection management, and simulated booster drafting. Update your account at FABDB.net to get access to all the features. Bring your game to the next level. That's www.fabdb.net. All right, it's episode 20 of the Instant Speed Podcast. It's nice to have you here. I just got back from Philadelphia, where I was at SCG-Con, saw a lot of fascinating people, awesome human beings. Some of them even said, hey, are you the guy from the Instant Speed Podcast? I said, yes, I indeed am Dalen Mack. No, that's not what happened, though he was there as well. It was a great time all the way around. That event was won by Charles Dunn on Bravo, star of the show, defeating Chain. Yeah, Chain made it there. Imagine that. 5 Bravos in the top 8. Surprised? Maybe. Who knows? That's how it shook out. The calling in Europe, the first one, is going to be in Krakow, and that is in Poland, happening on Easter weekend, April 15th to the 17th. Now, you want to go check out fabtcg.com because there is some information there regarding those who might not be able to make it. There's a little bit of extra spice there and some swag to be had if you just want to go but you can't. So you want to go check that out. Finally, also on FabTCG, something of note is that there's some rules and policy changes that affect the competitive landscape. Now, we all talk about how draws are, sort of parsed out as losses, etc. Well, conceding games is something that was not really allowed previously, but now it is, as well as a update to IP5s, that is Intellect penalties 5 are now down to IP4s, and PTI Pro Tour invites are now exchangeable or donatable. Well, you can gift somebody your Pro Tour invite if you want. Now, if you feel like this might be a little bit weird or a little unorthodox, you're not the only one. We've got U.S. national champ Tariq Patel on the show today to talk, not just the meta and Bravo star of the show, but how about all the rules and policy changes? He's got things to say. So we welcome Tariq Patel on the Instant Speed Podcast. I was there in Philadelphia, and I tell you, it was a Starvo fest. Bravo, star of the show. Yeah, he's pretty damn good. So maybe you want to give a go with it as well, but you want to build the deck and just see how it looks before maybe you pick up a few of the singles that you need. Go check out fabdb.net, your premier source for deck building resources, tools, and all the goodness, including Bravo star of the show. Build up your deck, tweak it, tune it up, upgrade your account to premium, get all the goodies that come with it. How about some booster simulations? Get the statistics on your collection as well as building that deck and just seeing the sheer power that is Starvo. Go take a look, www.fabdb.net. Upgrade that account to premium. Check it out right now. That's fabdb.net. The Instant Speed Podcast is always a better place when we have our next guest on. He is the U.S. national champion and one of the most respected opinions in the game. Welcome back to the show, Tariq Patel. How are you, Tariq?
Yo, doing good. How are you, Flake?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing very good. I've got big news. I figured you'd want to hear this. The big news being that since the Montreal Canadiens have replaced their coaching staff and with Marty St. Louis, Cole Caulfield has tripled his goal output from 1 to 3. Can you believe that, man?
Well, I mean, it's not hard when you only have one goal a season.
I know. Like, we were discussing, I think it was it you and I were discussing the fact that he was projected to have like between 30 and 35 goals. That was like the professional opinion. And then when midway through the season, he was sitting on one big fat goal that nobody remembers because he's been up and down to the minors and back a few times. But upwards and forwards with Cole Caulfield. But that's not what we're here to talk about, Tariq. There's been significant changes all around the league. I call it the league, the game, the competitive landscape of Flesh and Blood. Most recently being, I just got back from Philadelphia. We had a great time. SCG-Con had the Battle Hardened event where, frankly, it was a Bravo star of the show party. Frankly, the top 8 was just dominated, pun intended, by the new Guardian hero, Bravo star of the show, basically scooping up 5 of the top 8 slots. And I just want to get your first impressions about what the meta is shaping out to be with this hero, and your first impressions, or your impressions now of the hero that it's had its first test on the competitive landscape.
Yeah, for sure. So, I don't think it's any surprise that this hero took the tournament by storm. I wrote an article last week for Channel Fireball The deck was kind of spoiled early on. A player by the name of Matt W took it at a local tournament. A couple of friends of mine back up in Canada actually saw the deck. We played a couple of games, and it does not surprise me that it crushed the first couple of tournaments. Now, do I think it's going to be the star of the show for the rest of the season? Not so much. In our testing, it's fallen a bit short, but it perhaps, the versions we were testing weren't the most optimized. So we're going to continue testing it and putting it in our arsenal. But I really do think it is a week one deck, and we're going to see the metagame adapt and evolve a little bit more to counter it.
Yeah, this was a question that was essentially, I peeled this out of the Go Again section, which is usually our third segment here on the show, and because Dean Hopkins, who supplied this question at DH_Zaibatsu on Twitter, basically wanted to talk about this, and I thought it definitely deserved a little bit more spotlight than just the brief flash in the pan, which he says, to use his term here. He also asked, do you think this is a top contender for the entire season until new cards come out, or is this a flash in the pan? And the reason I asked this as well is because we've seen how your Briar deck wasn't necessarily a flash in the pan, but it did kind of fizzle out as time went on. And obviously the nerfs and the errata just kind of wiped that deck off the map, but there was eventually a decline in terms of its potency and its sheer presence in top eights on the competitive scene. Is this going to perhaps succumb to the same gradual decline as players start to perhaps figure out how to play against it, but even further, what heroes can adapt to that particular hero playstyle?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Metagames are typically self-correcting. So with the rise of one strategy, with whatever weakness that one strategy has, you're going to see the other decks kind of adapt, and players choose to play the decks that kind of exploit that weakness. And then from there, the decks that were previously really under heal from Bravo will then turn around and beat the decks that are now beating Bravo. And that's kind of how a metagame kind of develops. And I think we saw that already at the SCG Battle Hardened event. From what I understand, the metagame was a little bit more diverse in the Swiss metagame than was what was represented in the top 8. So I think even now, players are trying a little bit different things with where the metagame's set at right now. Bravo seems to have a really good matchup, but it wouldn't surprise me if, in a week or two, that deck kind of falls off and we only see maybe one or two of them in the top 8.
Prism was a big topic of discussion amidst myself and people that I was practicing with, and people within certain circles were discussing that perhaps Prism was an option. Lots of great new Prism cards came in, a lot of new auras that were also added to the scene, and just enhancing an already pretty strong deck with Prism. The funniest part was I myself was a little bit of a panic in terms of actually trying to acquire Prism cards. I figured that if I'm going to learn a new hero, this is a pretty sweet one to pick up. And when I got to the venue and we went down there on Saturday morning to look at some of these side events and play in them, I think I was approached by a few people who saw that I had Prism cards on the board and were like, "Are you selling those? Are you selling those? Because I'm buying. I will pay whatever you." And it's like, no, they're not for sale. They're not even mine. I'm borrowing them. Prism, however, did not necessarily first of all, it didn't make a top 8, but it wasn't necessarily the boogeyman that everyone thought it might be. We've seen how Prism took down New Zealand's nationals, and how there was a lot of discussion that if Bravo was going to be the proverbial star of the show, as a lot of people thought, as you yourself had thought it was going to be, Prism could have been a decent remedy to that, but it did not shake out that way. Do you have any insights as to perhaps why Prism wasn't necessarily as strong in this particular tournament?
I have a lot of very strong opinions. I myself was a believer after reading some of the spoilers that Prism would be the best deck kind of coming out of the gate. But I'm very much practice over theory. So even if I think, 2 + 2 = 4, and I'm like readily convinced of that in my mind, obviously like not 2 + 2 = 4, but if I'm like very strongly held belief about something and I practice it and it just doesn't come true, I abandon that pretty quickly. So I thought Prism out of the gate, reading the spoilers, wow, Fractal Replication, wow, the one that comes in for 7.
Miraging Metamorph.
Like, what phenomenal cards. They also got a bunch of really good 0-mana auras. This deck looks fantastic. You can combine the 2 types, aura versus aggro, and Prism is going to be set to dominate. And my testing just did not play out like that. And I think going into the event, anybody that tested with me, I was kind of like, probably just shouldn't be playing Prism right now I'm not quite sure where its spot in the metagame is. That's not to say that we're not going to see a Prism dominated tournament at some point, right? The metagame has a very weird way of working itself out, even last format where, Guardian became super popular. And then even though Prism had an awful Briar matchup, it was probably just correct to play Prism because of how many Guardian decks there were in the tournament. So, I'm never going to say never, but for me personally, I don't enjoy the play pattern that Prism kind of presents. I think, um, they do a lot of fancy stuff without any, kind of getting anywhere. They have a lot of fundamental holes. It's not my favorite deck itself, but there is definitely a spot in the metagame for the deck.
Runeblade was 3 of the top 8 in Philadelphia, and the way that the bracket panned out, there could have been a top 4 where it was basically I think it was like a pair of chains and a Briar, and then a solo Bravo. It didn't shake out that way, but there was very much an opportunity here to sort of have a top 4 that was reminiscent of meta's past. It could have been very much a been there, done that situation where, all right, we got a Briar and we got a couple of chains and a Guardian. Where have we seen this before? So was it better this way with a 5, with the 3 Bravos at the end, or was it better the other way, or did it kind of, having one end of the spectrum for the other, there was no happy median? What was your opinion on the Runeblade resilience in terms of making the top 8 here?
I mean, to me, I don't think it's any surprise that Runeblade's still around. The cards are still way above rate for what they do and what they cost. Spoiler alert, I'm not sure when this podcast will drop, I think Thursday, but I have an article coming out on Channel Fireball that I actually filmed on Saturday before the Battle Hardened, and my deck of choice was actually Chain. And I'm going to be posting my exact 80 cards. I have a Pro Quest coming up in a week. I'm posting my exact 80 cards, what I'm going to side in every kind of matchup, and just kind of give people my playbook functionally for the event. And I myself believed, over a week ago that Chain was super well positioned. If I knew anybody personally that was going to the Battle Hardened, if I knew you were going to the Battle Hardened, I would have probably just emphasized more that the deck to play that weekend was Chain. Yeah. I felt very strongly about that going in. I think Carrying Husk is still an unbelievable card. And for some reason, everybody always forgets about Chain. They forgot about Chain last format. Michael Fang took it to a second place finish to show how amazing it was. And although it lost Plunder Run, it didn't really lose much else. And all of a sudden, people not even talking about Chain again, and then here it comes roaring back. So that deck was kind of on my radar, and if I was playing at that Battle Hardened, Chain was what I was going to be playing. So that's a long-winded way of just answering your question that no, I'm not surprised by the Runeblade resilience. I think the 2 cards that they got, Swarm and Gloomveil and Revel and Runeblood, are just amazingly fantastic cards. And I would not be surprised to see if we get even more push towards Runeblade as the format goes on.
Visserai was something that was buzzed about a lot prior to this. I know that in a lot of the discussions that we were having, for instance, with myself and Dalen, we're talking a lot. Dale and Mac were talking a lot about matchups and this and that. And Dale and Mac was constantly going back to saying it's gotta be Visserai. It's gotta be Visserai. It's gotta be Visserai. At the event, just looking around, I saw a lot of Visserai. However, they never really bubbled up to the top. It was the other 2 Runeblades. Is Visserai still a legitimate option here? Is it well positioned, do you feel? Do you think that it's just maybe lacking a little bit? Because at the end of the day, there was a lot of hype around it, especially after Hayden won an event with it, and there's new cards that came in, and suddenly, despite all the hype, it seemed to just flounder when it mattered.
Yeah, and time will tell. One tournament is still a very small sample size, especially when we're looking at a very narrow scope of just the top 8. Like I said, all the new support that Runeblade got, I think Visserai may have gotten the best of it. There's an argument that Revel and Runeblood doesn't work well in the OTK plan, and maybe Chain got a little bit more. But I think all the Runeblades across the board, including even Briar, got a significant buff from this set. So even though Visceral kind of fizzled out, time will tell. I don't know. I have my strong opinions on Viscerai. The deck also comes with an inherent inconsistency in it, right? Hayden himself can tell you if you're going for a consistent OTK plan, there are times that you just whiff off Sonatas. Like even when you Sonata for 13, you kind of just don't get there. So there's always that inherent level of variance in Viscerai. And, people may just kind of opt for the more consistent chain builds or Briar builds if they want to really play Runeblade going forward. But I don't think, one tournament is enough to say, yes, no, Visserai. I think in the upcoming months, as the pro quests kind of develop, as we head into Indianapolis, we're really going to see it kind of shake out and whether or not Visserai is the top contender as far as Runeblade is concerned.
Just as a side note, I always love the fact that it's when we're talking about metagames, we always have to wait for like major events to see the new snapshot of it. It's not like this living thing that's constantly evolving from day to day that it would like on a online platform. I always find that so unique to this game, to the fact that there's that for all of those out there who are saying, why isn't there an online platform to play this on every day where you can just queue up to random people? Well, the meta's not going to be solved in like 48 hours, right? It's just constantly evolving. So that's a nice little piece there. Now there was a recent release from FABTCG.com. LSS released a sort of a slight little wave of rule changes and policy updates. It's called, if you want to read it, if you're out there and you want to read it, you can go to FABTCG.com. It's under the articles. It was published on 11th of February, and it essentially outlines some quite interesting rule changes, and one of them being that players can now concede games before time is called without being disqualified. The other is a revision to the what are called intellect penalties, based on kind of little faux pas and missteps that you might make, and you might get a penalty. I want to talk first, Tariq, about the concession rule change, and this was slightly sparked. I mean, there's a little bit of an outcry to the degree of people not necessarily being too happy about the fact that if you go to time and the game hasn't been resolved, it's a double loss. And this has bubbled up in various different scenarios. I know that I was slightly confused about it, and I've been the victim of it at times, and especially when you're looking at heroes like Oldhim that like to go the distance, Guardian that likes to fatigue. Usually if you're queuing into an average to if you're not playing against a very seasoned Oldhim player and they're trying to fatigue you, you are at the mercy of them trying to parse out their turns, where if they take a minute or two per turn, you are not going to finish that game. Those players, if they want to win, they have to be really they need to look at their cards and the muscle memory kicks in and they play their stuff. Now there's this opportunity here where a player can concede the game prior to tying being announced. If you're going to time and it's not happening, a player can concede and give a player a win. I want to know your thoughts on the revision of this rule. Is it a good change? What were the downfalls and pitfalls of it before, and what are the pitfalls of it in its current iteration, which I believe goes into effect on, was it March 14th, I think? Yeah, 14th of March is when these effects go into play.
Yeah, and honestly, I think they should go into effect sooner. By and large, I think the changes to the rules in these last updates were very positive. I think they were kind of common sense rules, changes that I think a lot of people wanted from the get-go, and rules that honestly people were kind of just gentlemen agreeing, kind of playing by anyways. Having been to multiple callings, including nationals now, there's been multiple times I've seen people just be like, yeah, I can't win, I give up, and everybody kind of moves on with their life. They probably weren't even aware that they weren't allowed to concede. I know I had one specific match where my opponent kind of conceded, and then I didn't even know about it. He was like, oh, well, technically I'm not allowed to concede. We were forced by the judges to play it out a couple more turns. So I think this is like a very common sense rule. I never agreed with forcing somebody to sit through games and playing, right? Like, if you pay your entry, it is your time to be there. It is your entry fee. It is your enjoyment. If you're not having fun, that should be reason enough to just concede the match, right? If I'm just getting fatigued by Oldhim and I've done 2 damage for you over the last 10 turns, and I just don't want to put up with it anymore, like I'm just going to go eat lunch. That to me is reason enough to just stop playing a game. Because at the end of the day, it's a game, right? People are there to have fun. And if they're just not having fun, that's all the reason in the world for me for a concession. So I highly support this rule of you can just concede when you want. And I think it should go into effect tomorrow, not even March 14th.
Yeah, at the Farewell to Wraith event, that one of them that I played in, I went to time twice, and each time, to me, I'm like, look, I'm not here to. It's cool to win and all, but at the same time, like the dude I was playing against, I had beaten him in a previous tournament, and in this case, I was just like, it doesn't matter. Like, it was going to time, and they had the last action, and I could have blocked out everything, but I just said, all right, I chose not to block, and to me, like, that's, I guess, the equivalent to conceding. But if I conceded, then I would have not that they would have cared, but like the right way to do it in that case was to just eat the damage and just take it like a, like a gentleman and say you win, but I agree with you in that case. And like, I like the point you make where it says you're there to have fun. And if you're playing to the fatigue, you're already there for 50 minutes. And if you're at the 40-minute clock and your opponent's at like 37 life and you have another game right after that and you've been grinding for X amount, at the certain points, like, yeah, like you said, I just want a sandwich. I want to get away from this. Like, let me get a Tim Hortons or something. Let me go get something to drink. Like, dear God, I need to get the hell out of here. And, yeah, it is a common sense rule. How do you feel about the change to draws as losses, and how do you feel about that? Because it has certainly come up to light again as a player by the name of TJ McBride went 5-0-1 at Philadelphia, and unfortunately for them, they were out of the top 8 because their draw, which was technically a loss, but even though on the score sheet it's marked as an O and like a XX and 1, they were pushed out by players who were 5-1. So it was odd. Now, obviously, if you're looking at the actual logistics of it, it's because they got the draw early and the tiebreakers are as such, it's seen as a loss. How do you feel about draws as losses? Where does that stand with Tariq Patel?
I hate it. I simply put, I do not like the system they devise. And if you go read their articles, they're actually very adamant that draws will equal 0 points, and this is kind of where it's going to stay from now until the end of time. So I don't think me kind of talking about it will change it, but I'm going to try my best. And I also want to preface this topic by saying I kind of, out of curiosity, went back in time. Are you familiar with the website mtgoeloproject.com?
I do now. So,
well, they log all your Grand Prix. This is a Magic website. They functionally log all your Grand Prix records over the course of time, and it's public information, so you can type anybody's name and look it up. And I was kind of curious on how many draws I've taken over 10 years of whatever, playing Magic or so forth, and I have 0 unintentional losses. So when I say I dislike the draw system stuff, it's not for me. I think most veteran tournament players know how to navigate the waters and how to keep pace of play. But where this really affects people, I think, is the newer player or the less experienced player, not even just a newer player. And it's those types of players that it hurts the most. So when I delve into this topic, I want to keep in mind that this is not necessarily from personal experience, because I've never really been burnt by an unintentional draw. But TJ is just one example I can imagine of all the kind of issues that this is going to create going forward.
Yeah, and it seems like just in general, and like it's not a matter of one player having more life than the other and you award a win in that case, so there's a way to sort of strategically grease out a win if you know you're going to time. It's just a matter of nobody wins, but nobody loses at the same regard. And I kind of feel the same way. I've always thought that a draw should be something separate from it. It always has been. In sports, typically, if you go to overtime and there's no winner, each player gets a point, though it's the some of those points would not equal what an otherwise regulation win would be, right? So TJ McBride getting bounced out of the top 8 feels incredibly bad, and I understand the reason in terms of against the rule sheet why it happened, but it just feels wrong, right? It just feels like that, like you got cheated out of it, because if you're just taking a glance at the score sheet and you see a 5-0-1 below a 5-1, it doesn't make sense.
Right, and that's the whole point, is that if you read LSS's website, the whole point of doing it is that they want to kind of eliminate the incentive for slow play, and they believe, this is a direct quote, that it's beneficial for tournament experience. And I already argue that it's the complete opposite, and that it creates awful feel-bad situations. Imagine being TJ going undefeated all tournament, which is just a rare event to have happen for anyone, right? Like, I could count on one hand over 2 decades of playing card games, the amount of tournaments I've gotten undefeated. And you don't even top 8 the event. That's just ludicrous, right? Like, this is not creating beneficial tournament experiences. This is directly flying in the face of player, experience for their game. And it's not working. I mean, the spirit of why they want to do this is they want to eliminate any sort of incentive for somebody to kind of play slowly and go to an end game, because they'd rather you play for the win, even if the odds are low, because a draw is still a loss. But the thing is that the people that draw unintentionally they're not the nefarious types, right? The people that get salty and go to draws anyways, they're still going to do that. Because if they're in a losing position and they go, oh, well, if I'm not going to win, you're not going to win either. I'd even make the argument it's easier in this game because of end of match procedure, because there's no like 5 turns to play it out. So all you really need to do is drag the turn out till time, or the game out till time, and survive 1 turn, and you functionally drawn the match. But anyways, those people will be those people, and that brings up another issue, an old can of worms of cheating and slow play, but that's neither here nor there. But they're trying to eliminate slow play, but the point is kind of irrelevant. People play slowly for a variety of different reasons. It's not because, like, nobody goes into a tournament and says, you know what I want today is 3 draws in the event. Nobody. Right. In Magic, like 2 draws is worse than a win and a loss, right? Everybody plays for wins. I myself have never taken an unintentional draw over 10 years. So I don't know. Like, among experienced players, it's just they're trying to prevent something that really doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's like there's that awful feeling of when it's like getting into a car with an Oldham and you're going over a bridge and you're just like, you're coming with me, buddy. Like, that's kind of how it goes, right? And it just feels bad. And like you mentioned, if someone has that negative intention of wanting to just tank the ship, the rules of whether a draws a loss or draws a tie, like, that's not going to change anything. If somebody wants to be that kind of asshole, so to speak, like, the dog is bleeping me out for me. Appropriate. I love it. No apology needed, dude.
Upset about this too.
I love it. I absolutely love. Like I said, I've had like a half dozen animals on the show by now, and I love it. What's the dog's name, by the way?
Her name is Bailey.
Bailey. So we have a Beignet, a Bailey, and I already forgot what Red Zone Rogue's dog's name, and he's gonna kill me. That said, it's tough. And the problem with fatigue decks is you're going to go to time unless you're a very seasoned player, but you've seen these decks win, and you've seen Oldham be popular, and people want to pick it up, they want to play it, but it's not easy to navigate. There's a lot of accounting that has to be done on both turns, so the turns are not very straightforward. And I think it was Brendan Patrick who tweeted out, said, what's, like, besides Wizard, what's the hardest deck to play? And you responded, and I believe rightfully so, was Oldham, and I agreed with you to that degree. Now, I don't know if you were just trolling him.
That was very tongue-in-cheek, yeah, but anyways.
But, I mean, I could see the argument. I kind of jumped on that train. I said, yeah, like, there's a lot of stuff that you have to do and balance out on both turns in order to get the optimal plays every time. And if you don't have that drilled into your mind through the course of several hundred reps with the deck, then the turns are not going to be as straightforward, and it's going to take you time. But if a player just wants to be an asshole, they're just going to sit there and say, yeah, hold on, I'm thinking, and then just watch the turn go down and just dance the line of calling a judge each time. Like you said, a whole other can of worms with that. But yeah, it just feels, ultimately, for a game that has so much that feels right, this feels so wrong.
Yeah, and I even have a story. The gentleman over at Team Covenant, I believe the redhead's name is Steven, correct? I believe so. I played a match versus him in real life. This was Tales of Aria Limited. We were both on Oldham, okay? And this is just an example of how the game did not get an unintentional draw, but it still creates not negative play patterns, but not optimal experiences, even when the game doesn't go to a draw. Because I was very aware that the game, had a high potential, Oldham versus Oldham and Tales of Aria Limited, could go to the draw, that I was constantly playing at a fast pace, and I would both remind both of us, like, I would not say, hey, make a play, move faster, but I would constantly go, pace of play is something we need to keep in mind. And that was a constant reminder. And I do that subconsciously. So, like, in the moment, I didn't even experience it. And I think he went on his podcast, and when he was recounting the tournament, he actually brought that up, that, like, hey, I played this guy exit round or whatever, and he was constantly reminding me, to play pace of play. And he actually said, that was the right thing to do. Oldham mirrors go to draws, but it's like, that wasn't the most fun thing, right? To be, like, constantly thinking about pace of play. And that kind of just goes to show you that, there's a lot of matches that end up with a draw, unintentional draws, for completely reasonable reasons. The decks just take a long time to play. They're complex, any number of reasons, and getting 0 points from it and then functionally getting yourself out of a tournament, even though you played well and did nothing wrong, it's too harsh for me. But I think we're beating a dead horse at this point.
Yeah, she's dead, long dead. Into the glue factory with that horse.
Can I make one other low-hanging fruit kind of nitpick on this too?
Hell yeah.
Because they talk about intentional draws on LSS's website. And I think it's like super niche because they're like, we are now allowing you to intentionally draw. But it's quite funny the way they phrase it, because it's like you only ever ID if ELO matters, but if ELO actually matters to you, you're probably just going to play it out anyways, right? If it matters enough that you're both taking IDs, then it matters enough to play out. For example, if I played against Matt Rogers, there's no effing way I'm conceding that guy. I'm stealing his ELO.
Yeah. He still hasn't gotten back to me about being on the show, so I'm all for you beating on Matt Rogers. Absolutely. He won't return my phone calls, that guy. He borrowed my sport coat at U.S. Nationals to be on the broadcast. Just been dusting me ever since. Can't believe it. All right. Last order of business here is PTIs being exchangeable, essentially donatable, and the consequences of it. Now, for those who are unaware, Pro Tour Invite is something that you can earn in various different ways, and it is something that is, I guess, highly coveted. Obviously, there's ProQuest coming along, and it's something that is incredibly valuable, but it's something also that you don't have to earn, as basically the new ruling being that this was released, I forgot particularly where, but here's the verbiage for everybody who's not aware. It says a player may gift for redemption up to 1 PTI to another player per Pro Tour by emailing yada, yada, yada with all the information. So you can basically take your Pro Tour invite that you earned and have someone else go in your stead. But there's so much more roots to this that once you start tugging at this weed, you're realizing just how nitty and gritty it gets, because this leads to, all right, well, who has these up for grabs, and how do you decide who gets them, and how do you get an edge if you're somebody who wants them? Do you pay for them? Do you offer favors for them? Do you trade for them? Do you give, it becomes a black market for PTIs, and I'm frankly surprised at the overall interest of this, or the overall opinion of everyone I've spoken to has been that, yeah, this is pretty cool. I'm okay with this. And myself as a non-pro player, I'm a little bit appalled. Maybe it's because when I have those brief little flash in the pan successes at tournaments, I'm like, whatever I win is mine. I covet it. It's amazing. When I won a cold foil shiver, I'm like, I rarely win tournaments. This to me is so important. I'm never giving this up, even when someone offered me money or a playmat or this or that. Hearing people be excited about the opportunity to sell or buy or trade or give up their PTIs was fascinating to me.
Yeah, I don't know who you've been talking to, but from what I've been seeing, people hate it. Even my colleague Brendan Patrick over at Channel Fireball has been, I think, quite outspoken about his dislike about it. And when I go through, the random Facebook comment pages, I see a lot of people kind of either poking fun at the idea or they don't like it in general. But I'm going to add to another one of your experiences then, because I'm actually a person that I don't necessarily like it, but I think it's interesting to at least experiment with. And I think that's what LSS is doing for now, is that they're trying something new, and I honestly applaud them for it. And I don't mind it at all.
So the question about this now goes down to the legitimacy of the tournaments themselves when it gets to, people passing along their PTIs. And, it was explained to me perhaps it has to do with something. It was Tommy Fresh from Fresh and Buds podcast said, a lot of this might be the fact that there's COVID around and people can't go. So you don't want to put those PTIs to waste or whatnot. I mean, it's just the reality of the world we live in. Obviously, yourself, you're a doctor. You know exactly how this has affected the world very intimately. Now, the problem is that the legitimacy of these tournaments now gets completely tanked to a degree. I mean, if you have a certain amount of people that are there, first of all, the way I see this is a double-edged sword, because number one, you have a player who's can't go. You have another player who buys their entry into it, which they haven't earned it, so they're not necessarily good enough perhaps to go there. But these people who are buying it, yeah, you're at the Pro Tour, but do you honestly think you have a shot in hell to actually win if you didn't earn it against everyone else who is there legitimately? Like, that's to be, it brings down the quality perhaps of the tournament, and it also is just hilarious to me. If, like I was saying about, if I'm at the booth casting this, there's absolutely no way I'm not bringing up the fact that the person who is there acquired their invite through alternative means other than qualification. Like, I would not shy away from that.
Well, okay, let's start with the obvious thing that I want to bring up, okay? That a lot of people want at least one PTI. So I'd say you could count on one hand the amount of people in the world, not just North America, in the world, that are in a position to kind of sell or give away extra PTIs. Like myself, I'm not in a position that I have one PTI right now. I can't just go, hey, Flake, you want to go to the next Pro Tour? Give me $200 and it's all yours. So let's just make that very clear. The amount of people actually in the position to sell extra PTIs to just the highest bidder are almost non-existent, right? Out of North America, I think it's like Michael Fang and Tyler Horspool, maybe. I'm forgetting somebody else, maybe Dante. So like maybe 3 people, and then outside of that, there's like Matt Rogers. So like 4, maybe 5 people total. Like on one hand, I'd say globally could even do this, right? So it's not like there's going to be 50 people at a Pro Tour that are buying, invitations. So that's I want to kind of get that out of the way first. Is that I think the numbers and the fear people are having are overblown. Second of all, in order to get a PTI, it's not very easy, right? You don't, for example, this upcoming ProQuest season, you get an invite to the event. That is different than a PTI. I cannot sell the invite that I get at next week's ProQuest, right? So it's not going to be just anybody who's selling the ProQuest invites. It is most likely going to be a grinder that's been to either a calling event where Battle Hardens happen. So basically, they've had to likely travel to an event to acquire this PTI that they then have to sell. And yes, the person buying it may, illegitimately get there or whatever, but I also believe that the type of person that cares enough to buy a Pro Tour invite is probably, somebody that cares enough to put in the time and work to be at least somewhat competent at the game. Now, maybe you'll get like the random Joe Schmo who just wants to do it once or twice and kind of, blows $1,000 or something or whatever they're going for. I honestly don't know on a PTI, but I think those types of people will be the exception rather than the norm.
Like the way I see it, it's just somebody with a lot of money that wants to go to like a New York Yankees fantasy camp. Like you pay like $2,000 to go practice at the Yankee Stadium with like a couple players for a weekend, and it's an experience. And you have a professional pitching to you, and people like playing at 10% because it's you're paying the money. It's an experience. It's like going to Disneyland for adults. What I feel for me for this is that, yeah, like I get what you're saying, like that there's only a few who have an extra one in their back pocket that they don't need and they can get rid of. But there are some who just don't care. There are some who are just like, I earned this, and I don't really care about going to the event. Like I don't like my chances. I don't like the meta. I don't like this. I honestly believe that you outlined it perfectly in terms of those who have extras. However, I do believe that since it's everybody, it's not just extra PTIs, it's any PTI, that there might just be this small pocket of people with this pipe dream of winning the big one, and this is their way in. And I feel like at a certain degree, it kind of shaves a little integrity off of the event, but I get what you're saying. And at the same time, like, who are these people that are going to be paying or trying to, get there, and how much are these going to go for is another question, but we'll see how that shakes out, right?
I think it's a valid concern, right? But at the end of the day, I think, yes, I agree. Some people may get invites that probably shouldn't be there, but it's self-correcting in the way that, those people will often lose pretty early. So whether it'll change the grand scheme of how tournaments kind of turn out, I don't think it'll have much of an impact. I also do think it can have some really cool experiences kind of baked in, right? Like imagine, I know you're trying your best, for example, let's imagine we're really good friends and we're traveling to, we're on the grind together going for Pro Tours or Pro Quests, like I used to do back in the day when I played Magic, and I was traveling with a buddy, right? And let's say I'm in the position I am now where I have one PTI, which I plan on using in New Jersey, and we're both playing a PTQ. It creates these really cool scenarios that if we're really tight, you can also cheer for me for winning the ProQuest qualifier next weekend, because you know that if I qualify for New Jersey, I might just give you my Pro Tour invite so that I can go to the Pro Tour together with my friend. So I agree there's negatives like tournament integrity and, all that kind of stuff that people are pointing at. But I also do think it has some opportunity for some really cool outcomes. And I've talked to my Magic friends about it because they heard the news and they had a lot to say. And at the end of the day, I want to be clear that I don't know if this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing, but I applaud LSS for trying something new and interesting. And I do think, even if it's just a way for their best players to supplement their income by being able to sell PTIs, it may make the lower rounds or the earlier rounds of a pro tour a little bit more diluted, but I still think it's an idea worth trying. It's at least new, so I can't fault anybody for trying something new.
I just want to go back to the factory where you said, "Imagine we're good friends."
Imagine.
Well, I'd like to think we're at least friends, so we'll work on upgrading. I don't want your PTI, by the way. Like, I'm not gunning for an extra invite, so I just want to sort of maybe break into the top 8 and get my shot at being a good friend of Tariq Patel.
I'm just glad you caught the subtle daggers.
I love it, dude.
It wasn't that subtle.
Yeah, let me just remove the harpoon from my chest and we can move on with this interview. All right, last order of business before we go on to go again, and that is the fact that there's also another little rule change. For those who are not aware of what a major intellect penalty is, it is not what I was suffering from through high school. No, friends. Major intellect penalty is what happens when there's basically something you do, a party foul in a game, and you're given a penalty within the game that is not necessarily a game loss. Major intellect penalties have been reduced from IP5 to IP4. So I want your thoughts on this, Tariq, as well as just explain to everybody the significance of what an IP5 or 4 is and how a major intellect penalty influences a game.
Yeah, for sure. So intellect in the game is functionally how many cards your hero will draw at the end of the turn. And the number behind the IP is how many turns you have that intellectual penalty for. So IP4 meaning you draw one less card for 4 turns. In terms of penalty severity, I think this is, in my opinion, too major. I would like to see it more as an IP3 or IP2 and then let the game resume. But it's a fine balancing act because they want to disincentivize, decklist errors, showing up late to matches, but they also kind of want to walk the fine line of also not being a game loss or match loss, right? In traditional card games that are played at best 2 out of 3, there's a cleaner solution where you lose one of the games, but you still have the opportunity of winning the match, the 2 out of 3. But what they're often finding is when somebody got an IP5 before, they were just losing the match outright. I've toyed around with other suggestions, like in my friend group. For me, a much cleaner solution would be if the penalty infraction, I should say, not infarction, I got the medical term there. If the penalty infraction happened before the match started, I would much rather see like a 10 life point deficit or like a 5 life point penalty or something like that. And people will be like, oh, what about like the benefits that come for that, like scar for scar and so forth. But I'd argue, any benefits that your cards get is heavily outweighed for 5 life. Like, I would start the game up 5 life on all my opponents, no questions asked. I don't care. You can play 4 for scars for all I care. And I think that would also create a more positive game experience, right? Yes, they messed up. They showed up late. They got a penalty, but they can now just play with their deck for the whole game, right? Without having this like weird, awkward, not really flesh and blood type scenario that kind of drags on. And then for any penalties, sorry about that, Bailey, it's okay. For any kind of penalties that happen during the game, I would like to see maybe then IP2, IP3 type penalties that occur, like drawing extra cards or whatever. So to me, that would be a cleaner solution. But as it currently stands, I think IP4s are a little bit more punishing than they probably should be.
Yeah, essentially, you're playing with one less card, and if you're already on the back foot, you're giving your opponent, off camera. You mentioned, it's like having time walk like 3 or 4 times in a row, which is basically you're in the driver's seat with almost no penalty. And most times, if you're already playing fairly defensively, you can usually donate 3 cards and pitch to swing weapon and at least get something out of them. But in this case, if you're donating everything to a block, you're eating it for 3 turns and that's it. It's over. So a lot of the cards that you're drawing, you're never going to get to see. You're never going to get to play because you're just getting pummeled. Absolutely just devastated by what your opponent's throwing at you. So I like your options as well. And obviously this is something they're still toying with. I don't suspect that this is where this is going to end because I am with you on this. And IP4 is still fairly severe. But the game is young. And do you suspect that this is going to get another revision in the near future?
I think so, and I think LSS also mentioned that they're going to continue to look at it. Because keep in mind too that 4 cards represent, like, each card represents about 3.5 damage or 3 points worth of blocking. So if you're down 4 cards, that's functionally like being down 12 life. Because in this game, all that's kind of consistent is life and armor. But I think LSS kind of stated in writing that this is something that they're going to continue to monitor and kind of revise as time goes on. So I'm hopeful that at some point in the future we'll see hopefully an IP3 or maybe even my life point suggestion, but we'll see.
I like it. All right, Tariq Patel, thank you so much. We've got one more segment. You know it, you love it. It's called Go Again. You're going to stick around, I hope. It's usually a segment for close friends, but I'll allow you to get on that portion of the show.
You're still salty about that, eh?
Just a little bit. All right, we'll be right back with Go Again with Tariq Patel. All right, it's time to go wide with Tariq Patel as we go again on a series of rapid-fire questions. Are you ready to go again, Tariq Patel?
Let's go.
All right, number 1. This one's coming in from me, frankly, and it's one of my new favorite questions because it seems to be a recurring theme. Wrestling always bleeds into this show, apparently. What is Tariq Patel's walkout music?
There's so many good ones. Being a sports fan myself, there's the classic, Hell's Bells, AC/DC, Thunderstruck. The fact that I won nationals this year, I can even choose something a little bit more cocky, like Hail to the King from Avenged Sevenfold. But if I had to choose, it'd probably be the Home Depot theme song because I get shit done.
I mean, I understand like paying royalties to a musician. I wonder what the royalties would be to pay to Home Depot or just randomly. Well, interesting thing is that the song that you hear at the start of this of the podcast here is by a individual who goes by Stepper Rhodes. That's their like singing moniker or whatever, and they're a friend of a friend. And I remember they were kind of introduced to me, and I really liked the song that you hear here, especially like the key lyric of I work hard, why does everybody want to shuffle my cards? I really liked that line, and I ended up reaching out to them and got permission to use it on this show. So no royalties, baby, just exposure, I guess. But yeah, we're not paying Home Depot on this show. Sorry, buddy. All right, number 2, this one's coming in from Dusfim at Tom Road Run on Twitter, asking, would be cool to know if Tariq has any pre-event rituals or superstitions, like lucky socks or something, or just the strategies for getting in the right mindset to be a champ.
I do, and it's kind of a weird, nuanced one, but I try and avoid carbohydrates and high glycemic index foods about 2 to 3 days before any event. And that's based on actually really good science. Insulin in general kind of depresses your cognitive function overall. You feel a little bit more foggy. You don't think as clearly, and higher glycemic index foods tend to release more insulin. So leading up to events, I eat, probably a little bit more leaner than I would normally. I try and avoid the carbs and the pastas and the pizzas, and I try and eat a little bit more leaner meats like chicken and fish rather than a steak. But don't get me wrong, if you offer to take me to a steakhouse the day before an event, I definitely will not turn that down.
I already owe Tannen a steak dinner. I ain't paying for yours either yet. Those are restricted to, like I said, my closest friends. Okay. Number 3. Now, you are a man of many talents. You're not just a U.S. national champion. You're also an Onyx player in Halo Infinite. So I got to ask you, man, you got the battle rifle locked and loaded, but what is the ideal secondary weapon of choice when you're out and battling?
I mean, obviously the rocket launcher, but besides the power
That's
weapon,
cheating. You can't do that.
Yeah, the Mangler. The Mangler is just super overpowered right now. It is probably the best weapon in the game by a lot. You can usually use it like a sniper rifle at this point. It's quite ridiculous. It's a shotgun up close, and yeah, it's just by far the best weapon, most mobility in the game.
Yeah, when the first time I ran into that thing, I'm like, when did the Mauler get range? Like, what is this? Ridiculous. This next question comes in from Andrea Biaggi at Capello, asking, what's your dream location for PT number 2 and why? I mean, like, New Jersey is already like the number 1 destination for everyone in the world. Who doesn't want to go to New Jersey? But if you were to...
Hey, watch yourself.
I'm just saying.
I'm a big New Jersey fan. So you might not know this about me, but before I moved to Florida, I used to live in Jersey for 4 years. And I think it gets a lot of unnecessary hate. But anyways, go on.
That's all I got for you, buddy. I was there this weekend. I stayed with my buddy Mike, aka No Control. I stayed at his place in New Jersey. Nice little town, not gonna lie. I saw a Wendy's, and that was
Where,
interesting.
where were you?
We were in Maple Shade, New Jersey.
Okay, there you go. So New Jersey's like all the best parts of like suburban lifestyle. Like you're outside the city, it's kind of gorgeous with like all the benefits of having everything to do and good food because your proximity to like New York City. I think New Jersey gets a lot of hate because people fly into Newark and then they kind of see like the custy ghetto-y side of like New Jersey and they think that that's what New Jersey is all about. But it's actually like a beautiful state. Anything you want to do is there. They have like great policy for like healthcare and social services, and you don't have to pump your own gas. And I think it was like, I've lived in a lot of places, everywhere from Canada down to Florida. So New Jersey is probably the highest on my list of places I've lived over the years.
That was I was not aware that you weren't allowed to pump your own gas when we were driving. We were in Philadelphia for the event, and as we're going back, he's like, "I got to stop for gas." And as we're going, he's like, "Oh, I have to pump my own gas. I forgot." I'm like, "What kind of weird monarchy do you guys have here? Are you like, what are you, some sort of royal? Like, I don't get it that you're like so upset that you have to pump your own gas." Like,
that's how great New Jersey is. Yeah.
Apparently so. Must be nice. He said it's like, it's part of job creation, this and that. I said, yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm like, I pump my own gas because I ain't a wuss. But then I kind of understood a little bit about why. But your dream location, if not New Jersey.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, back to the topic. Probably Hawaii, because I've never really been there before, and it always looks cool when I see events kind of hosted in Hawaii. Second to that, New Zealand, but it would probably be a pain in the butt to get there. Same reason, I think it would be a cool location. And anywhere in Europe, I'm not well traveled outside of North America. I've been all around North America, but not much Europe travel.
Those are good ones. I like it, especially Hawaii. I definitely concur there. Next one coming from Tommy Fresh at Fresh and Buds Pod, another great podcast if you're looking for one, Fresh and Buds. This one asking, who's a quote-unquote bad or underrepresented hero that you are a fan of and would like to play at some point? So maybe somebody who's kind of a little off the radar right now that needs a little help.
So I'm very strongly opinionated that I think Dash is awful, and much to Matt Rogers' dismay, but I think that hero is so bad. I also think, I have a soft spot for Lexi, so I think Lexi or Dash are two decks that I enjoy playing at like a casual local level that I wish were slightly better. Have you ever seen like Indiana Jones? You remember the scene where the guy like takes out his swords and is like all that like
yeah
like, crazy thing, and he just gets shot in the face? Like that's what I feel the Dash is. They pitch a blue and they take like 4 game actions and they like hit you for 2, and then a Guardian player just like comes back and nails you in the face for like 8. And like with Guardian Shield now, it's or with Ram's Head, excuse me, it's not even a good matchup anymore. So your previously best matchup in Guardian is not even good anymore.
That's a great,
poor Dash and poor Lexi.
That's a great visual. So if you're listening to this and you have talent, go ahead and get that clip from Indiana Jones and just Photoshop, like the Dash and the Bravo face, because it's pretty accurate, well represented. This one's coming from James Warburton at WarburJM asking, what keeps you motivated through losses at bigger events? How do you avoid focusing on mistakes?
I mean, I'm still human. Like everybody, mistakes and losses affect you. And I grew up in a household. My father was like kind of a hard ass, and he'd always be like, you got to focus on the next thing and don't let losses get to you. But what I've learned over the years, and this is just me more maturing, is feeling down or bad about your misplays are just a part of life. And I think the biggest thing is to kind of deal with it in between rounds and then let your kind of angst about it kind of wash over you, get over it. And then by the time you sit down for the next round, get past it and just focus on the next play, the next turn, the next game, because spilt milk is spilt milk, right? You can't put it back in the jar once it's all over the table. So really just focusing on the next play, the next turn, one play at a time, one turn at a time. And in my opinion, it kind of works itself out. And I'll actually tell a little story here because it happens to everybody. I was lucky enough that at Nationals, I took my second loss, I guess, against Craig Krempels, who's an old-time Magic player, Magic grinder. And he another New Jersey guy, and he's friends of mine going back. And he beat me with like a cheeky little double lightning press turn. And I remember, he could tell I was a bit, tilted, but it was kind of like whatever because I had to then kind of win out in order to top 8 nationals. And he just kind of like bought me a milkshake or a shake after the match, and that just really pulled me back to reality. So just having like good people around you also definitely helps.
I like that answer. Again, that's good insight there, and just surrounding yourself with positivity. Also, because you could take a loss and feel bad about it, and you might not have no one to pick you up. A lot of the people kind of rely, and when they ask these questions, they just think of like how do you on your own pick yourself up. But I like that you mentioned that others can do it for you as well, and that's important. Mm-hmm. Seventh question coming from TJ McBride asking, with the Pro Tour happening before the next set, are you worried about the format being solved? Also, bonus question, would you rather see a multi-format Pro Tour or a single format, and why?
I am a bit concerned that it's going to be solved. I don't have a magic 8 ball, so I can't say for certain. But it's always on the back of my mind because I think this game is in a delicate spot, and the player base kind of expects a certain level of playability for all decks. And I unfortunately don't see a reality going forward where that's the case. I was having this discussion actually with Hayden Dale a couple weeks back, and he made a really good point that even in some of the greatest Magic formats of all time, because he used to be a Magic player too, there was only really, a handful of decks that were at the top of the metagame, right? You can always point to like a tournament deck here or there, but by and large, there was only really 2 to 3 really playable decks. So I do think it's going to be a solved metagame by the time the Pro Tour comes along, unless like a really, really oppressive kind of deck comes along and LSS needs to ban something. But I don't really have a preference for an open metagame versus a closed metagame. I know I've been playing cards for years. I've played in both. I know how to approach both in terms of testing, how to metagame against it. So I'm fairly comfortable with whatever comes to fruition.
And in terms of multi-format, Pro Tour, we've seen. You won US Nats by having to draft, right? And right. One of the drafts that you pulled, I think it was like a double Terra Sunder Guardian, which was ridiculous. But do you prefer having a Pro Tour where you need to hone both of those skills to be the more complete player, or do you prefer just like a CC style?
I apologize, I misunderstood the question. Yeah, I definitely like multi-format tournaments. I think they're just a lot more fun, right? Being able to test 2 decks at once also stresses your ability to kind of multitask on your time off. It makes for more well-rounded players, coming to the top of the tournament. So I'm a big fan of multi-format tournaments. I think it's a lot more interesting for viewers as well. It's a lot more fresh, especially once Classic Constructed kind of works itself out, which I imagine it will by May. It can kind of lead to some monotony. So yeah, I really do like multi-format.
Beautiful. Last question coming from Chris Fuller at C_Fuller306 asking, how do you decide when it's right to change heroes? When a new set like Everfest comes out, at what point do you go from adapting your deck against the new support to joining it? So I guess in other words, how open are you to pivoting, or are you more stubborn? If you see something, you see a little glint of hope in a particular hero, and you think there's something there, how hard do you work at trying to break it open before you pivot off to something and explore another option?
Well, I approach it in kind of a very open way. So the answer is I'm very open to pivoting. I'm a big fan of Richard Feynman, for those physics nerds out there that know who he is. And he was a big proponent of, it wasn't just like what he taught, but it was kind of his way of thinking, very first principle like. And he has a really good philosophy when it comes to these things, where a mathematician or a person can hold 2 ideas in their head that mathematically mean the same thing, but their notations are very different, okay? And in order to be a good thinker, you need to have both of those ideas, even though they mean the same thing, in your head at all times. It's not enough to just know one of the formulas or the other. You need to know both of it to have a complete understanding, because you could use something that was easier to understand in one formula in a scenario that was harder to apply if you maybe use the other formula. And I think that's very applicable to card games as well. So when a new format comes along, I don't actually start with any one hero. I kind of just play everything. Over the last couple of weeks, I played Dash, I played Prism, I've played all three Runeblades, I've played Boomer Bravo, I've played Starvo. I'm always on the lookout for new things, not necessarily because I think every hero is the deck to play, but because it will give me the most information. And when I see a really cool play pattern from a deck, I can then kind of go back and be like, okay, all these decks that I've tested prior may have an issue with this. This is something worth exploring. And that's kind of how I approach, this is when I pivot to this kind of hero and go from there.
Very, very insightful. I appreciate it, Mr. Tariq Patel. Again, the U.S. national champion. No Pro Tour invites up for sale, unfortunately. At least not for any of his not closest friends, man. I really appreciate you being on the show. As always, you're always welcome here. I know I poke and prod you all the time because you are a fan favorite. You usually get a lot of great response. So thank you so much for being on the show, Tariq.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And again, if anybody wants to get in touch with you or sort of hear some of your musing, where's the best place to get some more Tariq? I know that you're going to be, you already have, and you will be coming out with more content on Channel Fireball. So why don't you talk a little bit about that and where to get more Tariq?
Yeah, so me and Rob are doing a video series right now. Follow him at Tellurian Dropouts. We're trying to put a gameplay video up about once a week. And I really believe in the integrity of the stuff I kind of put out, and I want it to be of the highest quality. So if I see a cool deck in the metagame or a deck that I myself am going to play in the upcoming tournament, even if it kind of steps on some toes, I'm going to put it out there. Because I believe that if you read my content, if you take the time out of your day to consume what I'm writing, I want it to be in your best interest. So I'm going to be posting a gameplay I played against Rob where I myself am on chain. And I'll be posting in the next couple days whenever the editor gets up to posting it. My full deck list, full 80 card deck list, the exact thing I will register at my upcoming ProQuest. And so you yourself, if you want to try your best to win a ProQuest and don't know where to start, you have a good base board to kind of jump from. So that's kind of what I'm doing over there. And then for my day-to-day musings and thoughts like Eminem's performance at the Super Bowl, you can follow me on Twitter at Tariq Patel 10.
Beautiful, man. Thank you so much again for being on the show. And to everyone else listening, again, I appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to follow the channel, be it here at 93 Media on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple, Google Pods. A positive review always goes miles for us, friends. We don't ask for money. We just want your kindest and possibly lyingest positive thoughts. So thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget, you're not losing. If you're learning, keep playing the game. You might win. We'll see you next week on the Instant Speed Podcast.